This is a long and detailed description of the topics on which I am most questioned: my spiritual life, conversion, the family's response to my conversion, and my future plans in the Islam. No, a boy doesn't give me converted. My spiritual life. I've been captivated by God since young. Like many children, I looked at the clouds or stars and imagined who, what, where, why and how God was. When trying to verify His presence, he established experiments to find proof. For example, placing a glass in the table and ask God to move it, to prove His existence. With no results, he varied the object, time, and tried not to look. Maybe God didn't want you to see Him move you? Again, I tested different methods of prayer to see which ones worked. Among many other things, I tried to pray over my face, my knees, standing, having a good posture, stretching out my fingers, begging Him, offering a sacrifice, that is, God, if you help me get a bike, I'll never eat again ice cream. After a while, I realized that if God did what He asked He to prove Himself to me, or if there was a method of prayer that would guarantee my desired result, then I would have been God, not Him. I was brought up as a Christian and, at the same time, as he grew older, he went to different denominations and asked the ministers how they knew, for sure, that God existed. I thought this should be the question they heard the most, but it is almost never asked to them and, surprisingly, most don't seem to like being asked that question. Finally, I found a pastor who didn't fear this question and that, in fact, he loved her and appreciated the genuine honesty of a soul in search. He was an intellectual, Rice University, summa laude, but the most important, he was a highly spiritual individual. Answered every question that I did and introduced me to many spiritual theories and principles. It helped me to transform my life of prayers, of childish behavior in which I asked for everything to God as if my prayers were gifts from a wish list, in a more mature meditative prayer, and in a follower who listens to God's guidance and follows His direction. My life was blessed to have known you and yours wife. I started teaching children at Sunday school at the age of 16. I love teaching children about God more than that any other activity in the world, and I believe that through God, this is my best talent. I have many funny stories about my experiences in teaching. However, if you enter this page, which is already too long, it will get even longer. A year later, I was asked to Christian leadership training. It was a valuable experience, because in addition to learning additional valuable spiritual principles, I learned that pastors are taught in terms of the strengths and weaknesses of the argument for the Christianity. This gave me a strong and unique rationale to argue about Islam in relation to Christianity. The following year, I was asked to serve on the Healing Ministries team, helping those who passed through physical, spiritual, or emotional difficulties. I felt lucky to serve in this sector because I was surrounded by the best people, in the best church he had already attended. He was much younger and had much less experience than the rest of the group and completely out of my level. Still, so I stayed, because they had the knowledge I wanted. Always wanted to know what to say, and what not to say, to those in circumstances desperate. I decided that unless the rest of the team figured out what it was in my head, I wouldn't say. Once again, I felt that my life had been undeservedly blessed to be close to and learn from those who have been most admired. Sometimes, however, since it was nowhere near his level, looked around in the room and began to think about the song of Vila Sesame. One of those things, it's not like the others. One of those things is outside the place. I also have many stories, funny and interesting, from working with this team, but it would be too long. At some point I began to evaluate my teammates, the people I thought were the most elite, wise and spiritual. Though they were superior to me in every way, I thought to myself that they were not where I wanted to be when I arrived at the age. I perceived a distance from God in Christianity. I discussed this with my pastor, stating that he wanted to develop my relationship with God. He suggested that I try to pray more often during the day, mentioning that Muslims pray 5 times a day, which is supposed to help in this matter. Of course, he wasn't trying to pique my interest in Islam. Nevertheless, he did. I had other difficulties with the Christianity. The concept that paradise could only be obtained through having Jesus as Savior with the good and bad deeds of no relevance in the scheme of the things. It was an idea that always defied common sense, for me. Theoretically, in Christianity, a person who sins every day of his life, he will go to paradise if he accepts Jesus as his Savior, a second before dying. The man who does good all the days of his life and does not accept Jesus as his Savior during his lifetime, is sentenced to hell eternal. What sense does that make? There are many additional problems with the Christianity, but I will not go into them at that point.